Good evening, everyone. A very warm welcome to the 2026 Sue Lloyd-Roberts Lecture in memoriam from our wonderful, talented, courageous and resilient alumna who sadly is no longer with us. It's fantastic to see an absolutely full Jacqueline Dupre music building here tonight and see all of you, our alumni, guests, staff, students. Fantastic to have you all here, to hear someone who is another amazingly courageous, resilient, talented and highly persistent, as is her wonderful husband Richard, and they're both here with us tonight. And I'm thrilled to welcome Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe to our college, and I'm absolutely delighted that Nick Guthrie, Sue's widower, has been able to help us achieve this here tonight. And as you know, Nick is the person who will tell us a little bit about Sue, and then he will introduce our most honoured speaker here tonight. So without further ado, Nick, may I hand over the floor to you? Thank you.
Well, good evening, everyone, and thank you very much for coming. This is the 9th Sue Lloyd-Roberts Memorial Lecture. Tonight, it's going to be slightly different. We want to focus on Iran. Now, I'm sure you're all aware of the recent turmoil there. Perhaps this regime has killed 20,000. It's injured 200,000 in its attempts to stay in power recently. So please bear those thoughts and figures in mind when you listen to tonight's speaker. Tonight's speaker, in fact, embodies the very best of what Sue strived to achieve in her career. Sue was a champion of free speech, a campaigner for human rights, women's rights, children's rights, indeed all human rights, as outlined in the United Nations Charter. She called out regimes who abused their people: Burma, China, Turkey, Russia. She shone a blinding torch onto areas of human behaviour no longer acceptable: female genital mutilation, modern slavery, forced marriages, grooming gangs, and so much more. And perhaps most important of all, she exposed the shortcomings of governments, especially ours, for the glacial nature of dealing with diplomatic problems. So, in the very best traditions of this lecture, St Hilda's have chosen as our speaker tonight someone who exemplifies Sue's views, who is of the same mould, has courage, determination, inner strength, and who has a remarkable story to tell, and who we should all support. I don't know whether any of you watched the BBC series 951. If you haven't seen it, it's on iPlayer, and you should watch it, because it tells brilliantly what Nazanin went through. Sometimes it's a difficult watch, sometimes it's an unbelievable watch. But what it really does is expose just how difficult it is for any of us, suddenly caught up in some international row, to have the confidence that our government will act quickly and effectively to allow us all to remain sane and come home safe and well. Zaghari-Ratcliffe said in a press conference soon after her release that the feeling of returning home was precious and glorious, but also criticised the government's response to her imprisonment, commentating that I've seen 5 foreign secretaries change over the course of 6 years. How many foreign secretaries does it actually take for someone to come home? And we know how I came home. It should have happened exactly 6 years before. the government finally agreed to pay Iran an outstanding debt of £400 million for tanks that were never delivered. Former Foreign Secretary Jeremy Hunt sympathised with this, arguing on social media that those criticising Nazanin for her views on her imprisonment have just got it so wrong. He said, "She doesn't owe us gratitude, we owe her an explanation. She's absolutely right that it took far too long to bring her home." Yes, well, politicians do come and go. I was the producer when, as Robin Day once referred to John Nott, Mrs. Thatcher's Defence Secretary during the Falklands War, as a transient here today, and if I may say so, gone tomorrow politician. This prompted Nott to get to his feet, announcing that he was fed up with the interview, whereupon he took off his microphone, threw it down on the table in front of him and walked off the set. Now, if that wasn't enough of a hype spot, Day's calm response, "Thank you, Mr. Nott," was arguably the crowning glory of that remarkable sequence. Well, tonight I would like to welcome to this particular set Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe, someone who has suffered hugely by the revolving door of those politicians who are here today and gone tomorrow. She has entitled her talk "Stories of Survival," survival from Iran and the objects of storytelling. I know that what she has to say tonight will be absolutely terrific. Thank you.
Thank you so much. It is an honor to be standing here tonight giving the Sue Lloyd-Roberts Memorial Lecture. I would like to thank her family, but also the St Hilda's College for inviting me. I stand here today in the shadow of a new wave of violence and oppression on the people of Iran, the truth of which is only just coming out. 2 weeks ago, on January 8th, the Islamic Republic imposed one of its longest internet blackouts, a strategy used historically to stifle information about its repression. We now only know a fraction of what has been happening across the country. Many of us in the diaspora are still struggling to confirm the safety of our families, fearing deeply what the full truth will reveal. For the past 2 weeks, I was unable to get in touch with anyone in my family. I felt like an abandoned child, forgotten, or rather thrown once again into solitary confinement. The experience was horrific. Even though I'm now far away physically, I have underestimated how much connections to loved ones shape life and give it meaning. The fragments of stories that have surfaced so far show a situation far worse than previous suppressions. There are videos of mass killing, of injured protesters being shot, and of hospitals overflowing with dead bodies. Parents searching for their child to bury, calling out to them in the mortuaries, pile of bodies. I want to tell you a little story. This morning I watched a 12-minute video of this horrific scene that a dad was going around. Of course, these are stories that are coming with delay, so I'm assuming that this is a story happening at the either 8th or 9th of January. It doesn't look real. So this dad is holding his phone, going to this morgue, which is packed with bodies in black covers, and is calling his son, calling his name, just hoping that he would talk back to him, saying that, yes, I'm here. So he just goes round and looks at bodies of people laying on top of each other and calling his name, calling that, Seper, where are you? Hoping that he would he would be still alive. The regime's disgraceful treatment of its citizens is not new, but it is deteriorating. My story is less and less of an anomaly. In March 2016, my daughter and I traveled to Iran for 2 weeks to spend the Persian New Year with my family. At the return flight desk, I was abducted, taken to an unknown location, interrogated, and later sentenced to 5 years in prison. The arrest came so suddenly that I had no time to comprehend. I spent most of the first year of my incarceration in solitary confinement. I was terrified and confused. In an instant, everything that defined me, my motherhood, my home, and my life, were all taken away from me. I became a stranger in a new world, one defined by isolation, rigid discipline, punishment, and deprivation. Fear, anger, and profound loneliness consumed me. For the first 9 months of my incarceration, I was kept in complete isolation, with minimum contact with people, no access to pen or paper, newspapers, or books, except the Holy Book. After several months of struggle and numerous complaints, my family were eventually allowed to bring me books. Being severely claustrophobic, it was profoundly distressing to be locked in a small space with no window, no natural light, and air conditioning. There were days when I didn't have the cell. There were days when I didn't leave the cell at all, and no one came to check on me. It was intensely lonely and despairing. Time became something unfamiliar to me. For a long while, day and night were blurred. I no longer knew the time of the day or even the day of the week. After 9 months, I was transferred to the women's political ward in Evin prison, where I spent the rest of my incarceration. In Iran, prisons are a symbol of a broader system of abuse that many people are unwilling or afraid to confront. Evin prison, which has housed countless courageous men and women since the Islamic Revolution in 1979, are emblematic of the regime's systematic violence. Within a society structured by gender inequality, where men and women legally positioned as inferior, the mechanisms of repression do not disappear behind prison walls. Yet the solidarity amongst women in Evin prison was like anything I have ever witnessed before. Regardless of their religion, political beliefs, or social class, these women came together for one common purpose: to resist oppression, fight for their rights, and stand against the authoritarian regime that had unjustly imprisoned them. I spent time with women who had been imprisoned for many, many years, yet carried themselves with remarkable grace and dignity. Some were pillars of strength in the ward, supporting others, including myself, through the most desperate times. Their unwavering tenacity sustained us all together as we resisted the discriminatory rules imposed on us. They kept us standing together. We read together, entertained one another, cooked and ate together, laughed together, even fought together. We also survived it together. There were moments when we managed small victories, despite the discrimination we faced. We won the right to have our own kitchen to cook. Our families joined together to buy us an oven. Eventually, we could wear ordinary clothes instead of the prison uniforms when taken outside. One of our most meaningful victories was access to books. Our ward had 2 separate libraries, one of them hidden. To protect it, we fragmented the secret collection, concealing the books beneath different beds. Those stories transported me into another world, allowing me to forget where I was. I often wondered where we would be if people had not documented their stories of survival, of wars and political struggles. I came to appreciate the courage it took for people to survive these tragedies. It was a long road, but the truth eventually prevailed. and after 6 years of separation, I returned home in March 2022. The experience was overwhelming in itself. People constantly stopped me on the street to greet me and hand me flowers, while drivers would halt in the middle of the road and step out and hug me, sometimes in tears. I was only partially aware of the vast campaign taking place outside prison to secure my release. It often felt as though I was living in a world entirely separate. People arriving in prison would tell me about developments I knew nothing about. From inaccurate statements made about me by the British Foreign Secretary in Parliament to the Islamic Republic's propaganda machine fabricating false narrative about my life, these events unfolded without my involvement. I was being punished for the mistakes of others, and it was ultimately the persistence of that long campaign that helped secure my freedom. For a long time, I struggled to accept that I had actually ended up in prison. I wasn't who they said I was, and I wasn't there for any crime I had committed. Only gradually I realized I was the victim of a political dispute whose story was kept legally largely offstage. Understanding the truth was not straightforward. My imprisonment became an awakening to worlds I hadn't known existed, and the shadow politics behind government lies. There were times in solitary confinement when I felt completely abandoned. It was long and grueling, marked by uncertainty and fear, and by the anguish of being separated from my child. Sometimes it felt like no one could do anything about it. Being turned into a commodity, assigned a value that rose and fell with the political climate, was disconcerting and at times overwhelming. Only when I stopped searching for reasons why me, did I begin to find solace within myself. It was only after I returned that I realized the full extent of it. The pain hit hard. I had believed my truth was so evident it could not be ignored. I was naive. To the Iranian authorities, I did not exist as a human being. I was merely a commodity. The prison ward was under such intense surveillance that the number of cameras sometimes even outnumbered the inmates themselves. This was my first significant encounter of living under constant observation. Alongside this, I endured repeated instances of being lied about, with false stories about my life fabricated within the Iranian media and then slowly echoed elsewhere, including by ministers. Each repetition was deeply re-traumatizing. Yet media coverage and journalists played a crucial role in bringing our truth to light, leading to my release. We could not have done it without them. That coverage also created a measure of safety in prison, as a spotlight fell on those in power. They resented it, but it compelled them to treat me with more care. It also drew attention to the decision-making of both governments, particularly during our hunger strikes, when cameras were trained on the doors of power. This created a shift in balance of power. Authorities could no longer hide the injustice and were compelled to explain their actions. Abuse thrives in darkness, silence and shame. Exposing injustice disrupts it. The presence of an audience, and by that I mean ordinary people who cared, ultimately changed our fate. It was the eyes of the world on our story which eventually changed the decision-making. Yet when I returned, I was still wary of the media and often felt exposed, even questioning who could be trusted to tell the truth. I postponed watching the drama series based on our story. At broadcast, it felt too intimate a reminder of a painful period when I was seeking a second chance at life. The director, who is in the audience today, was deeply sensitive and caring, but it was an unsettling experience to have the private trauma beyond the headlines re-exposed. Yet it was transformative. The power of the drama lay in its ability to take our deeply personal story into a shared one. By bringing our experiences to the screen, it illuminated struggles of many other prisoners in Iran, whose stories are often hidden or dismissed. It allowed audiences to bear witness to realities far beyond their own lives. The series did more than recount past events. It created a space for empathy, recognition, and dialogue, particularly for those who have endured similar experience and forms of repression. Many people reached out to us in the wake of the broadcast to share their stories and to affirm their resonance. Stories of lived experiences transform numbers into faces, names, and lives. Personal narratives from families, eyewitnesses, and survivors give shape to suffering that would otherwise remain abstract, preventing people from being reduced to statistics. As we learned in our story, it is this humanization that moves global audiences to care and governments to act. Authoritarian regimes often try to isolate voices and control information, as we are currently witnessing in Iran. Storytelling is dangerous to power. When individuals share their stories and experiences, they essentially counteract the state narrative. These stories expose realities that official authorities hide. As access to internet is slowly being restored in Iran, the names, photos, and stories of those who were killed are coming to light, forcing us all to confront what was previously hidden. What once felt like a mythical number now has faces and stories. That is the power of storytelling. The situation following the January 8 and 9 massacre remains unthinkable. While some families are frantically searching through bodies to find their loved ones, others are being cruelly charged for the very same bullets that killed theirs. And the number of arrests continue to rise in the political aftermaths. Former prisoners, including myself, are now scrambling to gather and share the stories of detainees before they are erased once again, trying to draw attention to the fate of unknown citizens being held and tortured in so-called safe houses. Stories of courage, sacrifice, and solidarity help sustain those facing these fears. They remind people that they are not alone and that their experiences matter. Even through dark stories, people can find solidarity, fostering empathy and support. I have lost count of the number of people telling me how deeply they resonated with our story, particularly mothers with young children. They told me as they tucked their children in at bedtime, they thought of me and cherished every moment even more. Once the euphoric moments of freedom subsided, life looked very different. I came home feeling that prison had wasted much of my life. Being away for a long time made re-engaging with society much more complicated than I had expected. I was myself, flawed and fearful, suffering from severe depression. Rehabilitation proved to be a slow, demanding, and often unpredictable journey. It is easy to become jaded towards the world, dislocated from its pleasures when long away. Deep down, I am still fearful, terrified at times, and wary of public spaces, strangers, and even police uniforms. I often take refuge in our small flat, where I can mostly feel free from being overwhelmed. I easily feel a deep sense of dread about the world and what is happening in Iran at the moment. Yet I do not underestimate the value of freedom or being able to do ordinary things again. The freedom of not being controlled by others, of being able to choose and enjoy life as it is is a profound blessing. It may seem small, but walking into a supermarket and picking up ingredients I need, drinking a second cup of coffee, not having to queue to have a shower, or eating a meal in peace without rushing to be in line for washing up, they all might sound like simple acts, but they still bring me joy every single day. Telling complicated truth is more important in an age of simple lies. Investigations that challenge abuse and prevent injustice from being quietly accepted are absolutely essential. It was the committed work of investigative journalists that helped shine through the official falsehoods of our story. In dark storms, we might cherish the lighthouse. As the world grows more abusive, the powerful build more walls and enforce selective silences. The role of journalism and storytelling becomes more vital. Surviving to tell these stories in itself is an act of resistance, a refusal to let violence have the final word. Sue Lloyd-Roberts embodied this mission. Her commitment to uncovering truth reminds us that journalism is never merely about conveying information. It is about bearing witness, honoring those who cannot speak, and insisting that the world see what others try to hide. I stand here today as a happy ending, and able to tell my story. I could not have reached this outcome on my own. Our family was reunited thanks to the storytellers, and I hope they continue their work that changes lives. That is the object of storytelling. I would like to end this with a reflection. Freedom is not a given, but a choice. True freedom is the ability to drop the judgments imposed on us by the world and society, to liberate ourselves from limiting beliefs and the trapped feelings. It is about embracing every little piece of freedom we still have, while fighting for the larger truths that shape our lives. As Albert Camus once said, the only way to deal with an unfree world is to become so absolutely free that your very existence is an act of rebellion. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you so much.
I believe that we've just witnessed the most astonishing speech. But I'm not going to make the vote of thanks. I think we'd very much like Nazanin, if she feels able to answer some questions.
Sure. Yeah.
Okay. So we have a couple of roving microphones, and there will be one going upstairs as well. So who would like to ask the first question, please? So put your hand up. Please don't be shy. This is St Hilda's College. We have lots of St Hilda's alumni here. They're not usually backward in coming forward. Please, who'd like to ask the first question? So the question was, would America help by going into Iran?
Thank you. I would like to elaborate your question. By that you mean having a military action on Iran. I personally am not supporting any military action anywhere in the world. I think we have got enough bad things happening in the world, that we don't want to have another war. If you remember, in the summer, there was a 12-day war between Iran and Israel, and that cost so many lives. And they also attacked Evin prison, which then cost prisoners their lives. So I'm not supporting any sort of military action in any country at all. How America can help, how the world can help, I think there has not been enough coverage about what has been happening in Iran recently, because there is not much information coming out, because there is internet blackout, and as I said, the video that I saw this morning has happened about 10 days ago, like 8 days ago. So I think there has to be a lot more coverage about what is actually happening in Iran, and there has to be accountability. Military action is not going to help any problem, because it is not always the case that only the heads of the states will be removed, but it will cost, lives as well.
Another question, please? I can't believe everybody's being so thank you. So over there, please, and then in the second row afterwards. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Nazanin. Am I on?
Yes.
I don't think any of us can imagine what you went through, but the question I'd like to ask you is, how and when did you come to realise that you were a bargaining chip between Iran and the UK? How did you feel, and how did you cope with it?
Very, very early on, maybe like week 2, like 12 days. I remember that vividly, because they asked me about, when I was arrested, I was transferred to a different city. So I spent the first 7 months the first 2 months, 64 days in a different city in southeast part of Iran, border with Pakistan. They dragged me to interrogation, and they said there is something we would want from the British government. They didn't say exactly what they wanted on that date, but they mentioned that there is something we want from them. But I was naive to think, for a very, very long time, I was naive to think that I have got a young child. My daughter was 22 months old when I was arrested, and in an Islamic country, in a true Islamic country, they believe that family is everything and motherhood is everything. They also talk about heaven is underneath mother's feet. That's the English translation. I couldn't believe that they would do that to a mother, and I was still breastfeeding, and they knew it. I was confident that whatever this kind of fabricated story is, they will let me go, because I have got a young child. And we were talking about mothers and babies and motherhood, and this is an Islamic country. I was wrong, because obviously, I think gradually they got more and more clear about what they wanted, but also very, very clear about whether you die here, unless we get what we want, we're not going to let you go. And in fairness, they did keep their promise. It was awful, because ever since they were very confident in terms of kind of openly telling me that I am basically a hostage, I was treated differently compared to other prisoners, because in prison everybody has got an end date. You know that when you will be released, but also if you were a good prisoner, you can sometimes have concession, and they give you like clemency and pardon you and stuff like that. None of them applied to me, because I was not there for something I had done. And classifying me as a hostage, even though it helped me somehow, because they had to protect me, nothing could have gone wrong with me in terms of my health, my medical treatment, my medical needs. But from the other side, they could keep me forever until they, and it was awful. It was, it was terrifying, because there is one thing that you think that every day you're one day closer to your freedom, and you think that, okay, maybe tomorrow is my day, because it does happen. Randomly, people get released, as randomly they get arrested. But I could never imagine that would ever happen to me, because they were very, very clear that, even if we might bury you here, but we're not going to let you go until we get what we want.
Now go up to the gallery, please. Chris? Gallery, please. Did you have a question up there? Oh, fine.
Hello, here.
Hi.
I'm from Venezuela.
Yes.
I have not visited my family for 30 years. So I feel your pain. Sorry. I wonder, why kept you going? Why did you go? You were so brave to go. And my second question is, how do you manage to live every day, every single day, thinking about what you just said? You didn't know whether you're going to be free or free the next day or never. Mm-hmm. How do you live that every single day? You are very strong.
Thank you. It wasn't like this when I went back to Iran. I think over the past, so in March, it will be 10 years that I have been arrested. And on 3rd of April. And in March, it will be 4 years that I have come home. But 10 years ago, things were not this bad. I mean, we are seeing a lot more brutality that is happening in the country. And at the moment, people are advised not to travel to Iran. It wasn't like that at the time. And I think, if I was born in Iran, my family live in Iran, and I never saw any day that I would not be able to. I chose not to live in exile because I wanted to be able to go and see them. And that is actually what made me so angry for a long time, that if I knew that I was going to be in prison one day, I could have done many more things. I could have done the things that I always try to avoid. But I was just, carefully treading, not doing things that would put me in trouble. And yet again, I was in prison for such a long time. But also, now that I've come back, I've learned to live day by day when I was in prison. And I think when I came out, I realized that that's actually a good way of living. It's a very, very difficult thing to do, but I cannot plan things. It's not like I am last minute. I like doing things day by day, because for a long time I didn't know what was happening. I often talk about when I was arrested. I tried to avoid thinking about the big picture, that I was in prison and anything could happen to me. But I thought about the Peppa Pig ticket that we had from my daughter, that somebody had given her, and I was like, well, no, surely they're going to let me go because we have the Peppa Pig ticket. I mean, who's going to take her to? So my brain works that way, that I think about little things that I have to do today, because tomorrow, we don't have tomorrow. And all the plans that I had all those years for traveling, and we were going to a wedding in Italy, we were planning to do things in the house, and I don't know, like a lot of other things I couldn't do any of them. So after 6 years, I came back to where I had left 6 years before that. So I have learned not to think about it, and I have every hope. I have every single hope that things will change. Even in Venezuela, I think you have to be very, very, you have to be hopeful. Yeah, that's how we live. I think you shouldn't really stop hoping.
Hello, I'm amazed by this event. This links with Peppa Pig. You talked of reading books and you talked of stories. I just wonder which books maybe sustained you most or were most precious to you, which you shared with the other women.
There were many books that I felt I cannot forget because of the memories attached to them, but also, of course, because of the content of the book. One of them is the Western History of Philosophy by Bertrand Russell, that I read in Farsi with a group of other people. But then we realized that there is an English books were very, very scarce in prison. But we had somebody who had been to prison when I arrived for 9 years, and she was supposed to be there for 10 years, so she then left when I was there, and then subsequently now again, sadly, she's back to prison. She's a Baha'i lady who is lovely, and she had that copy in English, so we read that together, and halfway through she was released. So she gave the copy of the book to me, and when I was being released, they told me that you cannot take a lot of stuff, just a small suitcase, and we will make sure that you get your stuff later. But that book came home with me on that suitcase. That was one, and the other one was The Handmaid's Tale, which, if you think about it, it is quite ironic that actually we could read that book in prison in Iran. I don't think they had any clue what the book is about. And the book had come through post to prison. So we had one lady who randomly received the stuff through the post. Nobody else was allowed to. I think they probably had forgotten her. So she would receive little things through the post. And one day this book arrived. And we were like, surely any book has to go through the vetting process of it. They have got a very, very strict process of vetting books. And then they clicked through the cameras. One of the guards clicked that, oh, this is because the publishing company has kept the cover as the original cover, and that kind of gown and the head scarf. So she clicked what it was. So she ran upstairs and she said, "Oh, what is that? What are you holding?" And we were like, "It's a book." She was like, "Oh, but this is an illegal book. You shouldn't be reading this." And we were like, "Okay. Our job is to bring illegal things in, and your job is to take them away. Can you take this away? No. So we're going to give." And then she said, "Okay, so can I just suggest that you cover the cover with magazine, because the cameras will newspaper, because cameras will actually get it and they will come and take it off you." So she kind of encouraged us to keep the book, but cover it, kind of hide it in a way. And there was a huge list of people on the waiting list to read that book, and she was one of them.
That's a small kindness,
exactly,
from somebody that probably was rather unexpected.
Yes, and can I say one thing? I think she deserves for this part to be mentioned here. That this lady, she was one of the very kind guards that she was very, very kind to me. And by the time that I was there, she was a city guard. I think when I left, she became the head of the ward. She was killed throughout the bombing of Israel, bombing Evin prison. There were 2 guards. One of them was this lady who was killed.
Oh dear. I wanted to ask you, did they ever give you any indication of why you, I mean, a mother of a 22-year-old month-old baby, you're quite right, it's unimaginable that would give them good publicity. If they want, because there must have been a lot of other people in Iran as well who were travelling back to Britain. Mm-hmm. You won't have been the only one there at that time.
No.
Did they ever give you any idea? Were you just simply in the wrong place at the wrong time?
I think so. Well, obviously they will never... They always try to manipulate by saying that I have done something wrong. So they never actually claimed that I was a political hostage, even though they acted that way. But they always claim that I have done something wrong. But I think, just to give you an understanding of the way things work in terms of kind of political prisoners, hostages, but also dual nationals in particular in Iran, that there is like a big picture of whatever they're doing and like a puzzle. And there are a couple of pieces missing. So they arrest people randomly without knowing who they are. I mean, they probably knew who I was, but in terms of what they have done, so they get to know a lot more about them. As we say in Farsi, they buy them off you and they sell them back to you. So they get information from you, and then they try to see where they can fit you in that big puzzle, that big picture. So I think, like I said in my speech, that I felt like I was a commodity. So there was once this oil tank confiscated in the Gulf. There was like a little bit of a fight between. So there was an old tank, British oil tank, confiscated by the Iranians, and the other way around, a British one, an Iranian one confiscated by the Brits. And they were trying to push me to talk to my husband to tell them that maybe they can swap me instead of the oil tanker. And I was like, why? I have nothing to do with the oil tanker or nothing else. I mean, it is true. Or they would, there was this kind of JCPOA, which was the nuclear deal, the historic nuclear deal that Iran and the West were constantly kind of struggling to come to agreement with. And they often told me that, why don't you talk to your husband to try to encourage the West that they can kind of let you go as part of this kind of agreement. And I hated it because I felt like my agency was non-existent. They didn't care about who I was, they didn't care about my motherhood, my child, but about their own political agenda.
Thank you very much.
Anyone upstairs who'd like to ask a question? Well, who possesses the microphone? Anybody down here, please, over there, Alex.
Thank you very much. Your speech is absolutely amazing. If you were to have a conversation with Ayatollah Khamenei, what would you say?
I have not imagined of many things in my life, but this would not definitely, this would not be on the list if I was going to imagine. I sometimes think about it. I sometimes think that given how awful the images are, I mean, we are talking about, for the first time, okay, the thing is, what has been happening in Iran at the moment, it is a very kind of extreme version of what has been happening over the past 47 years. The only difference is we didn't know about them. There was no social media, so the use of social media has only become so popular over the past 10 or so years. So that's how we get to know exactly what has been happening. But this stuff has been happening for years and years and years. We just didn't happen to know that. I just want to know, as I talked about accountability, I would like to see that day that, these people are being put on trial for the things they have done, including killing people, imprisoning people, and basically violating their rights. And I just want to, I often thought about how would my interrogator feel when he goes home at night. I mean, I cried my heart out every time he took me to interrogation because I was missing my child. And I just couldn't, if it was a piece of stone, would have melted. How can human being be so cruel? I mean, what do they think? I don't think there is any, I think that their heart is made of stone. And I sometimes wonder, how do they feel amongst themselves? I have been trying to listen to a lot of podcasts and reading a lot about dictatorship and how dictators feel. It's a very peculiar way of kind of breaking into what actually happens in their brain and what actually happens in their head. And I actually feel sorry for them, if I'm honest, because it must be quite miserable, I mean, yeah.
Thank you.
Question here, please. Right, and then one to raise behind.
Thank you for that. My question's about misogyny. How many women are locked up compared to men, and why are they there? And could you say a little bit about the fact that we see men with long beards who seem to be telling women how they should dress and live? I ought to also say that on the way, one of our daughters said, how old is St Hilda's? And I thought, well, women finally were allowed to take degrees here not that long ago compared to men, so we're not immune from that here.
That's actually a very good question. So when I was in prison in Evin, I was in the political ward. So the only female political prison in Iran is the Evin. Whereas there are, almost each city has got a female prison. But Iran also has got a huge kind of rate of, in terms of crimes, drug dealing and drug abuse. Because unfortunately, being in border with Afghanistan and Afghanistan providing almost half of the opium and the drugs in the world, half of that half stays in Iran whilst it's going out of Iran. So there is a lot of consuming drugs, but also selling drugs. And women are a victim of that as well, because even though the country is very rich in terms of natural resources, including oil, it's actually quite a poor country because it is corrupt. And so when I was in that city that I mentioned to you at the beginning, at the first 2 months of my incarceration, the capacity of the prison, I was in solitary for about 45 days. I was the only one in prison in solitary, and it was a non-political prison, so they're not allowed to keep political prisoners there. But the law doesn't allow them to mix them. But because I was there for interrogation and they didn't have so-called safe house in particular there, they mixed me with the general ward, but they didn't want me to be with them, so I was kept in solitary. And the solitary confinement in the general ward in that particular prison basically is to make sure that women who go out on furlough and they come back, they do not bring drugs with them. So they swallow the drugs and they keep them for 3 days in the solitary to make sure that if they have been swallowing the drug is disposed. When I was then transferred to the general ward, I was there for another 18 days because they didn't know what to do with me. The Tehran office had asked them to take me back to Tehran. The capacity was 180. The number of prisoners were 420 women. I would say about 70% of them were on death row because using drugs in Iran, I think it's too much detail, but basically within certain limit, or above certain limit, which is actually quite a little amount of drug, you will be sentenced to death. It's a bit of a funny but also tragic story that when I was transferred, some of the women in Kerman prison had got my parents' number. So I was transferred to Tehran, and my mom one day told me, somebody called from Kerman, to say that she's in prison, but also she wanted to make sure where you are because they kind of transferred you somewhere else, and she was called so and so. And I said, oh yes, she was with me in prison. And then later on, a couple of months later, my mom said that, oh, she called again and she was released. She was on death row. Oh, that's good. So she was pardoned or whatever. Okay. A couple of years later, my mom said she called again. She was in another prison on death row again. And I was still in prison thinking, if somebody is on death row because of using drugs and selling drugs, surely they should be more dangerous than someone who hasn't done anything. She had been on a death row once, has been pardoned, has come out of prison, had a child. She very kindly had a child under my name, which was very sweet. That's how she called my mom. And then she went back to prison again and on a death row. And I was still in prison. That's how the system works. They do not keep people in prison, like I said, so people can be randomly released because they do not have the capacity. But by and large, they treat women in particular. It's a very misogynistic country, you're right, because they treat women as the second-class citizen. So male prisoners had a lot more power and facilities in prison compared to us. So we had to struggle to have every other day 10 minutes on the phone call to call our family, and then the phone call would the phone would cut off. Men had ongoing as many minutes as they wanted, even though in a country like Iran, which is largely traditional, women are in charge of family and children, but they would use that against us in a way that, okay, you want to have more phone calls, more minutes to be able to, we're not going to give that to you. So the moment they knew what they wanted, they would deprive us from having it. Yes, and then, of course, the second part of your question, yes, I think for a long time, the Iranian government, for them, hijab and the cover is one of their main pillars. So they were holding on to it because they knew that if they lose that pillar, then they would probably lose control of the country. But I think there came a point, post Mahsa Amini's killing in 2022, there came a point that they felt they have got bigger fish to fry. They've got bigger problems to deal with. So they have kind of loosened about coverage and headscarf. So before what happened before this massacre, actually Tehran people who would travel and come back, they would be like, it looks very, very different, because at least you can see, I think they initially resisted, but they eventually gave up. People could wear whatever they wanted to. It looked like a Western city, which is, the way it should be, really.
Thank you. Thank you so much for your talk today. I'd like to say things in two parts. The first part is thank you for your story, and thank you to the director, who I think you said is here for Prisoner 951. My daughter and I watched the series in preparation for today, and we are still reeling from watching it. If you haven't watched it, please do. The second part is my daughter had a question. In the last episode of that series, where the guards asked, what would you like us to do? And your reply in the film is, please do not close Tehran, it is our home, or Iran, it is our homeland. And I wondered, what is the situation for you and your family now, both before what's been happening recently and given the recent events?
I remember that day actually very, very vividly. A couple of days prior to my release, of course they didn't tell me that I'm going to be released. They just said you're free, but you can't leave the country. So they kind of kept me in limbo. They told me, what would you like us to do for you? And I said, I want you to allow us to come back to Iran. Iran belongs to all of us. And of course, I don't know any political hostage who had been exchanged or swapped or released on political kind of agreements and had returned to Iran. So that day I knew that until these guys are in position, I'm not going to be able to go back to Iran. It's a very complicated way of dealing with your case. And I also knew that some people, many Iranians live in exile because of the fear. And more importantly, I think post what happened to me, they were more scared of going back to Iran, because if you are politically active, then you can assume that this will happen to you. But my experience also shows that you can be a random Iranian person without having any history, but they can still arrest you. So he said, I remember he kind of nodded and he said, oh, Iranians can come back to Iran. That's fine. I mean, it's a free country. People can come and go, which was very sad, because I knew that what he meant by that. I knew that by that he means, you want to come to Iran? We're not giving it to you. I think we don't really know what is going to happen next in Iran. To answer the second part of your question, I think we can only hope that there will be accountability. We can only hope that there will be no lives lost. But the most worrying thing for me is what is going to happen to those people who have been arrested. We don't know figures. We don't know number of people who have been arrested. But the thing is, the government is already trying to put it in a way that this was all as a result of Israel and America and Britain and the West trying to infiltrate the uprising was basically their fault. And these people were killed because of what they did, basically, themselves. They deserve to be killed. But my personal worry is they will then try to either anonymously get rid of all those people, or a lot of those people who have been arrested and are in safe houses now. There is no kind of track record of how many people or where they are, but also they can be given hefty number of years imprisonment. And I think that is my main worry, that those people who have lost their lives, very tragic, but there is a huge amount of people who are in risk of potentially being sentenced for a very, very long time or executed. I think that's more tragic.
May I offer the last question to a member of the family? Please.
Hi, Nazanin. Thank you for sharing your story, and I'm so sorry for what happened to you. It sounds like our government really failed you. As a British citizen now living here, have they ever apologised? Are you able to forgive them?
Well, they There were certain people within the government, like Jeremy Hunt, as we heard. But when I met Boris Johnson, for example, at the time, when I came back, he was Prime Minister. No. He didn't. Well, the thing is, when I was being released, on that plane, I decided to leave that black hole that I was carrying in my heart on that flight. And the reason for that was making me that had made me so miserable for the past 6 years prior to that date. And I was not willing to carry that with me so that then it would make the rest of my life miserable as well. So I think for my own sanity, I decided to leave it with them and with their conscience to deal with it. And it wasn't my problem anymore. I have paid forward for my share, and I have suffered enough. And frankly, I didn't really think about it from that day. I felt it's going to make me feel so miserable. And I was coming back to my baby, who wasn't a baby anymore, and I just wanted to enjoy the time with her and my family. I wasn't. I think it was their time to suffer, whether they will or not. I think in their conscience they will, but it's not for me to. I don't even want to know how they deal with it. But I think from that time it was their problem to deal with.
Nazanin, there is always hope in youth, isn't there?
There is.
And I would like to invite our student leaders, our JCR President, Pager Dawson-Smith, and the MCR President, Valentine Sender, to come forward and maybe to bump you to centre stage if you're not going to be too frightened by that. Can we encourage you to do that?
Yes, of course.
Because they're going to give you the vote of thanks.
Oh,
Are you good?
yes.
So thank you. On behalf of all of us here today, I would like to extend sincere and heartfelt gratitude to our speaker, Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe, for her lecture this evening, exhibiting her profound bravery and courage in dealing with extremely challenging experiences that many of us struggle to imagine. It remains clear that governments and regimes designed to aid, support, and ensure the safety of their citizens continuously fail to do so. Your lecture was both powerful and deeply moving. Hearing you speak so vividly and honestly about your experiences in captivity has undoubtedly opened our eyes beyond our previous understandings of the world, especially beyond our own immediate Western spheres, with greater empathy and awareness. Perhaps now we will be encouraged to listen more carefully to stories that make us uncomfortable and to question narratives that we have taken for granted, and most importantly, to act with greater compassion towards those whose voices are too often unheard.
Thank you for your lesson of solidarity and the story you shared, particularly about solidarity among women, and how this is a way, obviously not the only way, but this is a way to resist, to fear oppression and to fight for our rights, and more generally as a way to fight authoritarian regime. And thank you for sharing your brave story. And yeah, I think it's very inspiring also to hear you speak about storytelling and the power and role of journalists in fighting authoritarian regimes, because as you said, the pure anti-freedom is in controlling information, and authoritarian regimes are afraid of freedom of information and people sharing their experiences. So thank you for all the work you do in sharing what you've gone through.
It was deeply encouraging to hear about the remarkable grace that the women with whom you were imprisoned were able to sustain, even in the face of the brutal regime imposed upon you and the discrimination that you endured. It was equally powerful to hear of the resilience that you maintained and the dignity that you preserved through acts of resistance, such as letter writing, reading, and storytelling upon your return. In particular, your reflections on storytelling reveal its ability to preserve identity, foster solidarity, and assert humanity in circumstances designed to strip away all three.
And one last thing from me, I also would like to share how, on behalf of students, we're lucky to have access to this kind of events in Hilda's. Because I believe, and I think we all do, that St Hilda's is obviously about academics, but beyond that, and I'm a very studious person, but beyond that, it's also about how it allows us to grow as human, as citizens, and I'd say like finding a place in the world, and trying to work towards justice and progress. And I feel like the Sue Lloyd-Roberts Lecture and the example you gave is really a call to trying as much as we can to follow the path of our brilliant alumni community and look towards the work of brilliant men and women in our everyday life and career, I guess.
We'd like to now invite you to a short drinks reception.